The Doodle was another pretty good episode. I feel like it's one of the weaker ones on the last disc, but it's still pretty good. As I do like, the mixture of stories, Newman getting busted for giving Jerry fleas, Elaine running around like a maniac. This is actually, I feel like when I was younger, this is one of the first Seinfeld episodes I actually remember watching. Well, mostly I remember the scene where they're outside of Jerry's apartment, but they can't go in because, it's being fumigated for the fleas. But yeah, and then there's also, of course, George's storyline where he's worried that a doodle that his girlfriend drew is making him doubt that the girl actually likes him and she actually thinks he's like ugly or something like that. Even though in past episodes there's been a couple times where appearance not important has not bothered George. But obviously this doodle drove him crazy. And we also, of course, get a storyline, like a smaller storyline. Jerry kind of has two storylines. The fleas and also his issue with his girlfriend, who seemed to start showing more and more of Jerry's germaphobe side, which we will, of course, explore in this episode. So it starts off with Jerry and George on a double date. Jerry brought his girlfriend, Shelley, while George brought his girlfriend, Paula, who apparently is in a drawing class that Elaine is taking. So they're just chatting, whatnot, when Jerry was eating some pecans and, putting, the scraps from the pecans on a small little plate. Well, then Shelley starts picking up those scraps, and she was eating them herself. George, to, not, make it obvious, pretends to drop his napkin. He then leans over the side and tries to get Jerry's attention and mentions how Shelley just eaten the pecan that Jerry just ate, which Jerry thought was absolutely disgusting and made a big fuss about it. So then the girls head to the bathroom, but they were, of course, getting ready to leave anyways. Of course, Shelley was a little, upset about Jerry freaking out like he did. So, but then while we're getting ready to leave, Paula then asks George if he can grab her purse for her. When he goes to grab it, he notices on a napkin, Paula drew a doodle of George, to which George takes offense to and thinks it looks pathetic. He hates how detailed she made some things about his face. He thought he looked like a troll. So, in a very teenage, high schoolish way, even though they've been out on a few dates, he wants Elaine, again, who is in the same drawing class of Paula, to ask Paula if she likes him. And again, were we in high school and George Ben, please find out if she likes me. It felt like, when you're a teenager, 13 years old, and you have a crush on somebody, you're like, I don't have the balls to ask them if they like me or not. Can you ask for me, basically, or whatnot? That's what George was begging. Elaine, though, meanwhile, still working for Mr. Pitt, of course, has a job interview with Viking Press, I think is what it's called. But they also have, a luxury suite at the Plaza, which I'm assuming is the same hotel that Kevin McAllister stayed in Home Alone 2. But, so, of course, Elaine lied, though, and said that she's from out of town. And I think she gave Jerry's parents' address or something, and their mail, because Jerry's parents were on their way up for a visit. I think their mail got forwarded up to Jerry's. I can't remember what the whole story was, but I know she used Jerry's parents' address as the out-of-town address needed to prove that she was out of town so she could stay at the Plaza. But, of course, Viking Press would cover it. But then we run into a problem. So, Jerry starts noticing he's getting all these flea bites, and he realizes that he has fleas. And when his parents walk in, he tells them he has fleas. So he gets an exterminator whose name is Carl. We will see him in a really short, soon upcoming episode. I think it's the next one or the following one. One of the next two episodes is when we see Carl again. But he tells Jerry that he's gonna have to fumigate the apartment with some poisonous gas. So nobody's allowed to stay in his apartment for 48 hours, which of course is bad news for Jerry because where's his parents going to stay while they're up here visiting? He talks to Elaine to letting them use her suite at the Plaza Hotel, which of course Elaine was like bummed about, but she, even though Jerry begged, she finally gave in and said, fine, I'll do it, whatever. So that's where they were going to go. Elaine, though, of course, her friend Judy was the one who got her this job interview with Viking Press that apparently sent her a manuscript that got delivered to Jerry's apartment that she needed to read before this interview. But of course, she had just left Jerry's apartment and it was now fumigated, so they couldn't really get back in. So then Jerry, well, I'm sorry, I skipped ahead a little bit. So Elaine, of course, went to her drawing class, and her and Paula were acting like a bunch of, chatty teenagers about, do you like George at first? She goes, yeah, he's cool. But then Elaine's like, do you like him, or do you like him, or whatnot? She goes, basically, and and she says how, looks are not important, and then Elaine gets in trouble for not chewing on her gum. But, of course, before the apartment got fumigated, George saw Elaine at Jerry's apartment before Jerry's parents arrived, and she told him that Paula said she likes George, and then also that appearance is not important, which still gives George this bad vibe of she still thinks I'm ugly though. So, of course, that's when. Anyways, fast forward back. Elaine realizes the manuscript is at Jerry's apartment. So she runs back to Jerry, who was trying to stay at Shelley's. They seem to have gotten past the whole pecan incident. Which, long story short, Jerry did go to Shelley's. But then she got kicked out because he wouldn't brush his teeth with her toothbrush. Again, showing more and more of Jerry's, germaphobe side. And unfortunately, that sucked for Jerry. But anyway, so Jerry took Elaine back to his apartment. But of course, there was a sign on his door saying, do not enter, being fumigated. Kramer, though, came out, not noticing the sign, thinking that he thought that Jerry put a do not disturb sign, but Kramer was there for about an hour and a half, and he had just recently gotten these very rare Mackinac peaches, and he stored them in Jerry's refrigerator trying to get Jerry to try them. But of course, they're only good for so long. And Kramer was worried that he's going to, get affected for being in there for an hour and a half, so he didn't realize it. But, of course, he also said he was in there reading the manuscript that Elaine had. But Elaine, when running into the apartment twice, holding her breath, she could not find the manuscript. What she did find, though, and apparently they were shown back in, I think it was the second episode of season 2, where this person was using these chunky wrappers. And, of course, based off those chunky wrappers, Jerry finally realizes who was the one who gave him the fleas because of those chunky wrappers. Realized it was none other than Newman. So Jerry runs to Newman's apartment, which there's been a little inconsistencies with Newman's apartment number. In some episodes, it's 5E. In this episode, it was 5F. And of course, after Newman denying, Jerry finally just says tries to get under Newman's skin. And finally, Newman just admits that he has fleas too. And he, now I thought it was the chunky wrappers gave him fleas, but in a deleted, now it seems like the chunky wrappers from his garbage is what gave him fleas. But really, there's a deleted scene where Newman, was, told some story about how he was on a postal route and some dog who had fleas attacked him. Of course, since Kramer, though, well, to get the Kramer story here, of course, from being inside there, he had lost his sense of taste from being around in those fumes. So then he couldn't taste the Mackinac peach. So Newman was like, well, since you can't taste it, give it to me, basically. And so Newman had eaten all of Kramer's peaches by the time Kramer got his sense of taste back. And in the actual final edit, that same dog was attached to the mailbox, so then could get revenge on Newman. Kramer set him free. The dog went chasing after Newman. Meanwhile, of course, Jerry's parents enjoyed their time in the plaza, but they did a little too much because they did a lot of room service, a lot of massages, a lot of food, rented a lot of adult movies. And Elaine met up with Kramer because she couldn't find the manuscript and told him what he thought the manuscript was about. And it seemed to work for Elaine until she got in trouble for doing too much room service. So she did not get the job with Viking Press. Of course, they had Jerry's parents were there. Uncle Leo was there with them. Nana was there as well. Like I said, they just caused a big mess and did a lot of room service, and unfortunately, it cost Elaine her job opportunity. George, though, meanwhile, first off, after Jerry got kicked out of Shelley's apartment, he stayed at George's until it was good to go back to his apartment again. So George, still thinking that Paula thinks he's ugly, meets up with Paula, and basically was just untucked his shirt and just acted like and basically was just trying to be as sloppy as possible. But Paula kept saying she didn't mind, and then she even said, and this is where George was like, "Okay, then now we're talking here." She flat out told him, "You could drape yourself in velvet," to which George, of course, has said many times, especially in season 6, that he would just love to drape himself in velvet because he loves velvet. And apparently they went off and they had sex. And of course George was just on cloud 9. But then, one of the last scenes of the episode, George came in eating a Mackinac peach, and then he had a seed or something like that he had put onto his plate. Paula, though, then pulled a Shelley, picked up the seed, and ate it. Completely turned George off from her. And that's the episode. That's the Doodle. Like I said, it's definitely not my number one favorite on this last disc, but I'd say it's definitely underrated. I do like this episode. Again, just the goofiness of does she like me or not? Or of course, the fact that George was able to, drape himself in velvet and be however he wants to be, but Paula was still into him. And of course, with the fleas and whatnot and the conversation. Like I said, I feel like that scene in general, when they're outside of Jerry's apartment in the hallway, that I feel like was one of the first ever Seinfeld scenes I'd ever seen. Of course, another fun fact too is Krista Miller, who played Paula, she originally was in she'd actually been in 2 previous Seinfeld episodes. Apparently she was in The Doorman, but she was uncredited, so I don't remember what she was. But she also played the lady back in the episode where George had the interview for the bra salesman position. There was a woman that he touched her material while waiting for the elevator. I think her name was Ellen. Krista Miller played her as well. And also, fun fact, she actually had recently, around this time, also had an audition for the Drew Carey show. But I guess they weren't sure if she could do comedy or not. So she took her the scenes from this show and showed it to them, and she got the job. Pretty cool, I'd say. So yeah, that's the Doodle. Again, good episode. Not my top, one of my top favorites, but it's one that I do like, in that if I would binge watch it, I would probably watch it for the fun of it again. I feel like this whole disc I probably would do that too for the most part. But that is the Doodle. I believe the next one is the Fusilli Jerry, which of course I have a little gag gift that I got from my girlfriend. And we also do meet a guest star who's appearing sporadically throughout the rest of the series, and also who Elaine seems to have multiple breakups with. Can't wait to be next. Can't wait to talk about the next episode. So what are your guys' thoughts on the Doodle? Make sure to leave your thoughts down in the comment section below. And be sure as always to slap a like on the video and subscribe for more content on my channel. And follow me on Twitter as well at DemandAirboy93. Until then, guys, I'm checking out. I will catch you all later. Have a great rest of your night. Peace out, everybody.